The leather chair in my father's study felt strangely cold, even though warm summer air drifted through the open windows. Sunlight fell across the polished wooden floor. Everything looked peaceful,
Calm. Perfect.
but the tension in the room felt heavy. My father sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his fingers folded together like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Behind him stood my older sister, Victoria. Her designer heels rested neatly on the hardwood floor. Her manicured hands sat lightly on Dad's shoulders. And on her lips was the same confident smile she always wore when she believed she had already won. Mom sat quietly in the corner of the room. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she stared down at the carpet as if something on the floor had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. Dad slowly slid a stack of papers across the desk toward me. The sound of the paper moving across the wood echoed through the silent room. "It's very simple, Elizabeth," he said calmly. His voice carried that familiar cold authority I had known since childhood. "Sign these documents and transfer your inheritance rights to Victoria." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "And you can continue living exactly the way you are now." I looked down at the papers. The words were clear. A full legal renunciation. If I signed this document, I would give up my entire share of Grandma's estate. Not just the money, but also my stake in the family company, Harrison Enterprises. My fingers slowly traced the edge of the paper. The ink on Grandma's death certificate had barely dried, and already they were dividing her life's work like scavengers circling a fallen animal. I looked up. "Why?" I asked quietly. My voice stayed calm, but the question hung in the air. "Why now?" Before Dad could answer, Victoria stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply across the floor as she moved closer to the desk. "Because the company needs leadership," she said. Her voice carried that same condescending tone she had used with me since we were kids. Real leadership. She crossed her arms. Not someone who spends her time chasing charity projects and emotional stories. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "The business world isn't a place for dreamers, Elizabeth." I almost smiled. They had absolutely no idea. Victoria continued speaking, clearly enjoying the moment. "Grandma may have been sentimental at the end, but we all know she wasn't thinking clearly during those final months." Dad nodded slightly beside her. "Yes," he said firmly. "Your grandmother wasn't in the best mental state before she passed." I slowly reached into my bag. "Really?" I said quietly. My phone appeared in my hand. I tapped the screen. A video began playing. Grandma sat peacefully in her garden, sunlight surrounding her. Her voice was steady, sharp, completely clear. "The future of Harrison Enterprises must be protected," she said in the video. "And I know exactly who I trust to protect it." Victoria's smile vanished instantly. "Turn that off," she snapped. I tilted my head slightly. "Why?" I asked, afraid she might say something else interesting. Dad's hand slammed lightly against the desk. "That's enough," he said sharply. "We're not playing games." His eyes locked onto mine. "You sign those papers today, or you're completely cut off." His voice dropped lower. "No trust fund. No apartment. No family support. You will walk out of this house with nothing." The room fell silent again. Slowly, I picked up the pen lying beside the documents. The metal felt cool in my fingers. Victoria leaned forward eagerly. Dad watched me carefully. And Mom still refused to look at me. I lowered the pen to the paper.
And signed.
My name flowed across the page in smooth ink. Elizabeth Harrison. Victoria grabbed the papers immediately, scanning the signature. A satisfied smile returned to her face.
"Finally," she said.
"Some common sense." I placed the pen down gently. "Oh, I'm showing something," I replied calmly. I reached into my bag again. This time I pulled out a thick brown envelope and placed it on the desk. Victoria frowned. "What is that?" I looked at both of them. "Something Grandma left me." Dad frowned slightly. "I already told you. Your grandmother's will was clear." I slowly opened the envelope. "Oh," I said softly. "This isn't about the will." I turned the envelope upside down. Its contents spilled across the desk. Photographs, legal documents, printed bank transfers, USB drives, and a letter written in Grandma's unmistakable handwriting. Victoria's face slowly lost its color. Dad leaned forward in his chair. "What is this?" he asked. I met his eyes calmly. "Evidence." Silence filled the room. "Every illegal transaction," I continued. "Every falsified report. Every dollar stolen from Harrison Enterprises over the last 5 years." Dad suddenly lunged forward to grab the documents. But I was faster. I pulled them back and calmly slid them back into the envelope. "Relax," I said softly. "There are copies." I looked directly at him. "My lawyer has them." I paused. "And so do the SEC." My eyes moved toward Victoria. "And the FBI." For the first time since entering the room, Victoria looked afraid. 30 minutes later, I stood outside the boardroom of Harrison Enterprises. The hallway felt quieter than usual. Normally, this floor buzzed with confident voices and expensive suits moving quickly between meetings. Today, it felt different. Heavy. Like everyone already knew something bad was about to happen. My phone vibrated in my hand. A message from my lawyer appeared on the screen. "SEC agents are ready."
Good.
I took a slow breath and pushed open the boardroom doors. 14 board members sat around the long oak table. Men and women who had spent decades acting powerful. But today their confidence looked fragile. Files, laptops, and cups of untouched coffee covered the table. As I walked to the head seat, several people exchanged nervous glances. That seat used to belong to my grandmother. Now it was mine. I placed the thick evidence folder in front of me. No one spoke. Suddenly, the door burst open. Victoria stormed inside. Her perfect hair was slightly messy, and her usually flawless outfit looked rushed. Dad followed right behind her. For the first time in my life, he looked older than I remembered. Mom slipped quietly into the room last, sitting near the door. Victoria pointed directly at me. "This meeting is ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't just call the entire board together like this." I leaned back calmly in the chair. "Actually," I said slowly, "I can." I gestured toward 2 people standing near the windows. "Before we begin, I should introduce our guests." 2 serious-looking individuals stepped forward.
Dark suits.
Professional expressions. Federal badges. "This is Agent Phillips and Agent Torres," I continued. "They're from the Securities and Exchange Commission." The room immediately filled with whispers. Victoria laughed nervously. "This is absurd." Dad stepped forward. "Elizabeth," he said firmly, "you're making a serious mistake." I opened the first file in front of me. "Let's start with something simple," I said. "The Employee Pension Fund." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I tapped a button on my laptop. A large screen behind me lit up. Numbers appeared. Bank transfers. Transaction records. Highlighted account numbers. "Over the last 4 years," I said calmly, $47 million disappeared from the pension fund. Gasps quietly spread around the table. Victoria's face turned pale. "Those were legal investments," she said quickly. "Were they?" I clicked another document onto the screen. "These transfers show the money moving through 3 shell companies." Another click, and eventually ending up here. A bank account number appeared, followed by a name. Victoria Sterling. The room went completely silent. Victoria's mouth opened slightly. "That's not possible," she whispered. Agent Phillips stepped closer to the screen. "It's very possible," he said calmly. One of the older board members cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Harrison, perhaps this discussion should happen privately." I turned toward him. "Like the consulting payments made to your children's companies?" His face instantly drained of color. "Companies," I continued, "that legally do not exist." Nobody spoke. Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." He pointed directly at me. "You are destroying this family." I slowly stood up. "Family?" I repeated. My voice stayed calm. "Let's talk about family." I walked slowly around the table. "Family doesn't steal retirement money from loyal employees." I looked directly at Dad. "Family doesn't secretly sell company secrets to competitors." I pressed another button. Security footage appeared on the screen. Grainy images of private meetings. Dad. Victoria. Exchanging documents with rival executives. A quiet wave of shock moved through the room. Grandma saw everything, I said softly. She spent the last year of her life collecting evidence. Victoria shook her head. No, she said weakly. You're lying. I opened another folder. This is Grandma's final amendment to her will. The document slid across the table. Perfectly notarized. Perfectly legal. 3 months before she died, I continued. Grandma transferred the controlling shares of Harrison Enterprises. I paused for a moment. Into a blind trust. Dad suddenly stood up. No, he whispered. I looked straight at him. Yes. I folded my hands calmly. And guess who the trustee is? The silence in the room became unbearable. Victoria stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. You, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Everything you thought you were inheriting, I leaned slightly forward, has been under my control for months. Victoria grabbed the will and scanned it quickly. Her hands started shaking. That paper you made me sign earlier, I added quietly. The one giving up my inheritance? I smiled slightly. It's worthless. Victoria suddenly lunged across the table toward the documents. But Agent Phillips stepped in immediately. Miss Sterling, he said firmly, please remain seated. Several board members were already standing now. Some headed quietly for the door. They understood what was happening. The game was over. I returned to the head of the table. Every board member involved in this fraud has 2 options, I said. Resign immediately and cooperate with the investigation. I glanced at the SEC agents. Or face federal charges. One by one, chairs scraped against the floor. Board members began leaving. Only 3 remained seated. The honest ones. The ones Grandma had trusted. Dad slowly sank back into his chair. For the first time, he looked defeated. 1 week later, I stood inside a quiet private room at the city bank. The noise from the boardroom battle had finally settled. News channels had been talking about Harrison Enterprises for days. Investigations had begun. Board members had resigned. And the company's stock had been temporarily frozen while regulators reviewed the damage. Victoria had moved out of her luxury apartment. Dad had checked himself into a private stress clinic. And Mom was still trying to understand how our family had collapsed so quickly. But I knew something they didn't. Grandma's story wasn't finished yet. The bank employee placed a small metal box on the table in front of me. This is the second safety deposit box, he said politely. Registered under your grandmother's name. I nodded. Thank you. When he left the room, silence returned. In my hand was a small silver key. Grandma's final message had been simple. The second box contains the real war chest. My fingers tightened slightly around the key. Slowly, I unlocked the box. Inside were only 2 things. A red leather notebook and a small USB drive labeled in neat handwriting. Insurance. I picked up the notebook first. Grandma's elegant handwriting filled every page. The first line made my heart skip. My dearest Elizabeth, what you are about to uncover will test everything you believe about our industry. I turned the page. Names appeared. Major corporations, global investment firms, government officials, judges, regulators. My breathing slowed as I continued reading. This wasn't just corruption inside our company. This was a network. A massive system of bribery, fraud, and manipulation stretching across multiple industries. The fraud my father and Victoria committed was only a small piece of something far bigger. I quickly inserted the USB drive into my lap. Thousands of files appeared. Emails, secret bank transfers, audio recordings, photographs, evidence connecting powerful people across the entire financial system. Grandma had spent years documenting everything. My phone buzzed suddenly. A message from Agent Phillips appeared. Victoria was seen leaving a meeting with Harrison Global executives. I frowned slightly. That company was one of the largest corporations mentioned in Grandma's notebook. Before I could respond, my office door suddenly burst open. Victoria walked in. She wore a new designer suit, but her confidence was forced. "Well," she said with a smirk. "Enjoying your time in Grandma's office?" I leaned back calmly in the chair. "Let me guess," I said. "Harrison Global is planning a hostile takeover." Her smile froze for a moment. "You can't stop it," she said quickly. "We already have the investors to support everything." I slowly turned my laptop toward her. The screen displayed one of Grandma's photos. Her eyes scanned the names. Her face lost all color. "That's impossible," she whispered. "No," I replied quietly. "That's Grandma's real legacy." She spent years collecting evidence. Victoria's hands started shaking. "You don't understand," she said. "If those people find out you have this information," her voice dropped to a whisper, "they'll kill you." Before she could say anything else, I pressed a button on my phone. "Agent Phillips," I said calmly. "You can come in now." The door opened again. 2 SEC agents entered. Behind them came 2 FBI agents and a federal prosecutor. Victoria collapsed into a chair. "They'll kill me if I talk," she whispered. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Miss Sterling," he said, "we're prepared to offer you full immunity." Victoria looked up slowly. "In exchange for your testimony about Harrison Global and yours." For the first time in years, Victoria looked at me like a sister, not an enemy. "Why would you offer that?" she asked. "After everything I had exposed, after everything she had done." I thought about Grandma's final letter. "Because Grandma believed in redemption," I said quietly, "even for people who made terrible choices." Victoria lowered her head. "I want protection," she whispered. Agent Phillips nodded. "That's already arranged." A few minutes later, Victoria left with the federal agents, and the largest corporate investigation in decades officially began. Over the next few weeks, chaos spread through the financial world. CEOs were arrested. Politicians resigned. Entire corporations collapsed overnight. The network Grandma had uncovered began falling apart piece by piece. One evening, Mom walked quietly into my office. She looked around the room. At Grandma's desk, Grandma's photos, Grandma's old notebooks. "She knew," Mom said softly. "She knew they would try to push you out." I nodded. "She chose you," Mom continued, "because you were quiet." I smiled slightly.
"No," I said.
"She chose me because I was watching." The next morning, I stood on a stage inside the company auditorium. Hundreds of employees filled the room. Many of them had feared losing everything. But today felt different. Hope filled the air. Harrison Enterprises was built on a simple idea. I began. That business can be successful without corruption. I looked at the faces in front of me. My grandmother believed in that idea. And today, we rebuild this company the way she intended. New policies appeared on the screen behind me. Transparent accounting, employee ownership, ethical investments, a completely new system. "We're not just fixing a company," I said. "We're proving that honesty can still win." The applause that followed was thunderous. Later that night, I returned to Grandma's office alone. I opened her notebook one final time. At the bottom of the last page, a small message appeared. "P.S. check behind the garden painting." I laughed softly. Of course. Grandma always had one more secret, but that could wait. For now, there was something more important to do. Rebuild her legacy. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch the most. They listen. They observe. They remember everything. And when the right moment finally arrives, they change everything.